A while back, I wrote a piece about nurturing growth and my journey to healing over the course of this year after the passing of my father last December on Christmas Day. And here we are on December 16th of this year, leading up to Christmas Day. And I've just been inspired to talk a little bit about this concept once again, mainly because just a short while ago, there was a release of an album called GNX by Kendrick Lamar, which on that album, a very, very important song, I think, that kind of resonates with me, but not only resonates with me, but kind of expands upon this idea of nurture and growth and what we gain from the seeds we plant. And so I wanted to just share or just kind of talk a little bit about this concept because I've come across this conversation a few times with clients recently because I think in this day and age, our expectations with regards to training and with regards to kind of overcoming certain elements or certain constraints that we have, we tend to think that there's this quick fix, and we've been set up and kind of conditioned to believe that, we just do A, B, and C, and then the outcome is going to be positive. But the thing that I've learned from gardening is that things don't always end up coming out the way that you anticipate it. And so you constantly have to address little issues. You're constantly having to, pull weeds and, figure out what's wrong with the soil. And if your soil wasn't good to start out with, then there's only two options. You can amend the soil, which is a longer process, or you can remove all of the soil altogether and start over with good soil. Now, we can't trade in our bodies. We can't say like, oh, I want to just trade in all my joints and start over from the beginning. So we have to start approaching our training and approaching the things that we do with our body as amendments. And as you know, with any type of amendment, the outcome is not necessarily going to be the thing that we think it's going to be, right? We can look at our Constitution, for example, and we've put in amendments and certain things have kind of gone in certain ways. And, in over time, we're like, hey, we might need another amendment on top of the amendment, right? A lot of us aren't willing to do the work to create those changes. And so here we are stuck in this sort of space right now in our society where we don't make amendments. We haven't made new amendments to help us progress, right? And so when I'm talking to a client about their current state and how their body is, and I'm saying, hey, you've spent 30, 40, 50 years creating this environment for movement that you currently have. And so we need to start working to amend this. We need to start working to create a better environment for better quality movement. And so if you're not willing to put in the time and effort and energy to do that, then I'm probably not the right person to work with, because this is going to take time and effort and energy. In training, we have to cultivate an environment that allows us to produce the outcomes that we're looking for. If we're unwilling to cultivate that environment, then we're going to continue to get the same outcomes. And so in the song Man at the Garden, Kendrick Lamar repeats this affirmation over and over again that kind of says, I deserve it all. As I started to reflect on that phrase, I started to think, well, what do you mean by that? And he could have a variety of different reasons why he's chosen this, but in I think art is meant to be interpreted, and so I'm interpreting it in the context of what I need it for in my life. And so when I say I deserve it all, or if you were to say you deserve it all, what does that mean to you? And in my mind, it means if I plant a seed today, I deserve whatever outcome comes tomorrow. And if I am planting a seed today, then that means I have to nurture that seed. That means I have to put fertilizer. That means I have to water it. That means I have to do all of the things. I have to pull the weeds around it. I have to continue to protect that thing that I'm growing. So that could be your kid. That could be your your savings, that could be whatever it is. But in the context of this, it's what am I trying to do in the long term? When I'm 60 years old, how do I want to be able to move? And it's the things that I do today that change the way that I'm going to be tomorrow. We can only affect today. We can't look back and continue. We can look back for context, and we can look back for understanding how we got here. But once we know how we got here, we can say, you know what? I don't want to do that anymore. I have a choice now. And now that I have this choice, what am I going to do right now in this very moment that is going to change my future? Because we can only change the things that we do right now in this moment. Because every moment becomes the past. This very moment that I'm speaking to you right now has already moved into the past. And so the seeds that I'm planting, the seeds that I'm nurturing, the things that I'm saying, the things that I write become the robust future outcomes. A lot of people are looking for a shortcut when it comes to these things. So like in my garden, for example, I had somebody help me put up garden beds, raised garden beds. And that was a little shortcut. Right. So that's like, having a little performance enhancement, right? I need a little extra protein. I need a little extra, something to kind of, some caffeine or something to keep, push things a little bit further. But the process of taking my garden from, a overgrown wasteland to where it is now has been a constant input of work on a weekly basis, a daily basis, sometimes 2 times a day. In the beginning, it took a lot of effort and energy. Like I had to be out there frequently. I had to be out there as frequently as possible because I had to make sure it didn't get overgrown. I had to make sure that the plants that I planted got rooted, got an opportunity to really establish themselves. Now that things are a little bit more established, I can go a day or two, I can go 3 days without necessarily going back there and checking it out. But what I find is that sometimes, especially with vegetables, for example, when you go out and a few days have passed and you don't go out there, you can go from having 0 aphids to having a shitload of aphids all over your plants. And that happens quickly. So once again, this kind of relates to how we interact with our bodies and interact with what it is we do. We can take a few days off, and that's fine. We need recovery. We need time for our bodies to recover from the efforts and inputs that we put in, especially if it's a heavy or hard input. But we should understand that consistency is key, and being able to get in there and get present and make yourself available to create those changes is going to be important. And so if we're taking 3-4 days off before we do another input, then the process is just going to be slower, especially when it comes to mobility training and when we're trying to make a big change with some constraint that we've had for many years. Like your hip doesn't move in the way it's supposed to be moving, and it's been moving a certain way for so many years. Now we need to put in a lot of input in order to force that change. Remember, the only thing that we can do to create change in our cells is provide force, because force is the language of cells. And so that force that we drive into not only our tissues, but our neurology is what helps us change and create adaptations. The upkeep and the maintenance of our tissues is super important, because at some point we go through this process where we think that it's a destination, like, oh, like I had this limitation or this constraint here, or I had this, discomfort in this joint or that joint, and you've put in a little work and now you're starting to feel a little bit better, and so you're like, you know what, I don't need to do that as much, or I don't need to, put in as many inputs anymore. Okay, well, you can scale back the inputs, but that doesn't mean you stop doing the thing, right? Not until we are gone from this planet do we get a chance or an opportunity to stop putting money into that bank that is our body. And so if you think that, your discomfort is a destination and that you're never going to be in some level of discomfort at some point in your life, then think again. Our life is long. Our bodies change constantly. And if we're not guiding, strengthening, giving direction to tissue, giving direction and programming to our nervous system, then we're missing those opportunities to create and maintain change. The last thing I want to say is that it's important that we think in more expansive terms. So instead of thinking in constraints like we're taught, we should think in the infinite amount of potential that there is. We are taught to think of things as this pie that, like, that's all we have is this little pie, and each of us is only going to get a sliver of that pie, and so we try to hoard as much as we can. We often think of that in terms of our bodies as well, and we don't see our training as trying to become expansive. As I was out in my garden and I've been working and building, you get to a point where you've kind of filled in all these spaces, but I'm always thinking, how can I expand this? How can I create more space for more things? How can I make this environment more diverse? How can I, make this more amenable to the plants that I have out there? How can I make it so that there's more robust flowering over the course of the year? All of these different things. It's expansive thought. And so I'm thinking outside of the box. I'm thinking of ways in which I can, create more with less. And I think that when we're training, we should always have this expansive view. Now, I'm not saying that like you should be like, okay, I want to be able to like wrap my legs around my head. What I'm saying is that we should always have the goal of trying to create more space, because the more space we have available, the more we can do. The thing that I see a lot of times as we get older, and I look at people as they move, especially in their 60s, 70s, is that we tend to like self-constrain. I mean, it starts when we're younger, when we're placed in chairs and told to just sit there at school. But as we get older, we have a choice, and we make these choices. We don't get down on the floor anymore. We don't sit on the floor. We don't, get up, and so then we don't get up and down off the floor. And so we start to confine ourselves to wanting to sit in a chair. The other things that we start to do is we start to do less of the active things. So, I watched a gentleman a few days ago as he was walking, and his feet just kind of shuffled as he walked. And I thought to myself, this man could use something so simple as stepping up and down off of a step, or gradually helping him lift his leg up onto a higher step, because he's not utilizing this function for the most part. He's not lifting his legs when you walk. He's just kind of shuffling them. There could be a variety of different reasons why this was the case, but he was he had to be about 80 years old. There's a lot of medical reasons why somebody could end up like that, but I say all this to say that we have opportunities for growth all the time. And if we're not building, then we're decaying. And so I want to take this moment to tell all of you out there who listen this far that we should consider these things in all aspects of our lives. If we're not constantly working on the betterment of ourselves, if we're not constantly working on the betterment of our home, if we're not constantly working on the betterment of our street outside, if we're not constantly working on the betterment of our neighborhood, if we're not constantly working on the betterment of our city, if we're not constantly working on the betterment of our country and its people on all of these different levels, then we are simply decaying over time. And that decay over time will eventually present itself as aches, pains, flare-ups, whatever they may be. And so however you want to define an ache, a pain, a flare-up, that could be the election of a certain politician, that could be the violence that goes on the streets, that could be a lot of different things. That could be the increase in the rise in homelessness, the increase in rise in prices of goods. All of these different things are our aches, our pains, and flare-ups that are happening over time. And so we've got to continue to work, we've got to continue to grow, and we've got to continue to evolve and think of ways that we can be more expansionist and think about ways in which we can, build more over time. All right. So I hope you enjoyed this article that I've just written. I took a lot of time to write this, and man at the garden. It's better to be a warrior in a garden than a gardener in a war. Thanks for watching.